Hi everyone, I'm Claire Liu and I'm the CEO of Know Your Team software that helps you become a better leader and avoid becoming a bad boss. And I am extremely excited today to have someone who is pretty much an expert on this topic in the latter case, right, of avoiding becoming a bad boss, someone who's managed to do this over the years. Really proud to have Edward Kim on the show, who is the co-founder and head of engineering for Gusto, a all-in-one platform for HR, payroll, benefits. We actually use it at Know Your Team. I think every single person who I've talked to, by the way, Edward, I don't know if you know, I mean, you probably know this, that uses your product in your company. They rave about just like how easy it is, how seamless it is. So it's
That's
been
awesome.
fun.
Well,
Yeah.
it's an honor to serve all these companies.
No, totally.
It's great to hear that.
Yeah, and you and I, we originally met here in San Francisco. We spoke on the same
Yep.
panel, and I remember when I was interviewing Edward, just being really impressed with how much growth the company has undergone, and for you yourself as a leader, how much growth you've undergone. And so excited to ask you, this one question about leadership today.
Cool.
All right, you ready?
Excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so here's the question, Edward. It's what's one thing, or it could be several things, that you wish you would have learned earlier as a leader?
Yeah, so definitely have learned a great many things in my journey in becoming a leader. I would say one of the earliest lessons that I learned was as a technical co-founder, there is a transition period that you have to go through where you're primarily developing a software as an individual contributor. And eventually as your team grows, you kind of need to stop doing that actually in order to properly lead your team. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think a big lesson that I learned was actually making that transition sooner. I think I held on to being a developer and contributing to the code for, I would say, maybe about a year and a half longer than I should have.
Wow. Okay.
And I think that was, in hindsight, a pretty turbulent time in Gusto's engineering team because I was trying to do two very, very important roles at the same time and probably not doing a stellar job in either. And so it wasn't really until I almost forced myself to fully commit to being a people leader and giving up coding myself that I was really able to embrace my growth as a leader. And I think that's when kind of I started just accelerating my own development because I was able to like fully focus my time there. In my opinion, and I talked to a lot of early technical leaders about this, it resonates with them so much, right? And
so I'm like so smiling and nodding my head. I'm like, yeah.
It's so obvious in hindsight. And oftentimes said, but very, very poorly practiced in real scenarios. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned. I wish I learned it a little bit earlier.
Oh man. I mean, you are hitting on one that I could not have heard enough times, like you were saying, from fellow founders and leaders, that transition being so hard. I have so many questions to ask around the situation, but I guess first is just to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of context about like what this moment in time really looked like for you and what was happening. Like, tell me a little bit about like how many employees were you at, like what was going on in the company, and what was that year and a half? What did that year and a half where you waited too long? Like, what did it actually look like? Like, how did you know that things were were they burning down, or were there no fires actually? And it was like maybe a mentor or like a coworker or something that pulled you aside and was like, hey, was it your team that said something? Like, tell me a little, like, let's zoom in a little bit on like, what was that year and a half of you were like, oh, that I wish I would have made that change sooner.
Yeah, sure. To paint a little bit of context,
yes.
I think our engineering team, and at that stage of the company, most of the headcount is in engineering. So our engineering team was probably around 10 to 12 engineers or so. And I was spending a lot of my time building features, fixing bugs for things that I had written, in the first 2 or 3 years of the company.
I love it. Yep.
And I was again, just trying to do two different roles at once. And every day I would kind of wake up and I would, have some coding work to do, building features, fixing bugs, and then also have what we now call like people empowerment. At Gusto, we use the word PE, people empowerment, instead of people management. And I had the other bucket of work, which is around people empowerment. And at that stage, you have engineers that are starting to ask questions like, hey, what does my salary look like a couple years from now? Not something I'm thinking about immediately because we know we're on this journey together. But at the same time, like looking to buy a house and I want to stay committed to this company long term. What can I expect in terms of like my progression in terms of salary? What can I expect in terms of the mentorship that I'm going to get and the coaching I'll get? What do we have titles or not? These are all questions that you don't really have to answer when you're just a few engineers in a room, like just trying to like just build the first feature together. But when you get to around, I think 12 to 15 or so engineers, and there's also a time element, like when you're maybe about a year and a half into the company, these are questions that very naturally and in a very healthy way start coming up. And so that second bucket of work that I had to do when I wake up in the morning was answering some of those questions, right? It's coming up with our compensation bands. We don't have titles right now at Gusto, but at the time we started coming up with engineering titles. How do people get mentorship and growth? What are our programs around that? Do we give budgets to people to go to conferences? All these things that like you don't really have to think about when you're small, like start having to think about. And so I would wake up every day and these two buckets of work, and me just loving to develop. I love coding. I love building things. I naturally gravitate towards the first bucket of work, which is building things and fixing bugs and building features. And I say to myself, okay, this other stuff is really important. I'll get to it at the end of the day, right? But what ends up happening is you just get sucked in, right? When I'm coding, like I just lose all sense of time. I always feel like I'm so close to getting a breakthrough. And I'm sure a lot of like developers experience the same thing. Like you miss meals because you just get so into it, so much fun. And so, it feels very benign at first, but you like reschedule like a one-on-one, saying, okay, like, can we meet like maybe tomorrow? Cause I'm like really in the zone here. And then the end of the day comes and, you don't really get to, thinking about, salary progression or titles or things like that. And then you're too tired to like do it. And if you do it, you kind of like rush through it, right? Cause you're at the end of the day. So that was kind of like what it looked like, for a while, let's say for about 3 to 6 months. I wouldn't say things were like hair on fire but I did feel like things started to get a little shaky, right? These are, when your team comes up to you and they're asking the same question like 3 or 4 times, do you have any like updates for me on this? Like, and everyone's really polite and Gusto's culture is like really, really nice, but that's a good sign that like people are a little bit, nudging you to get a little bit more progress on these really important things. I think from my perspective, I didn't see it as big of a deal as others saw it.
That's what I was going to ask. I was like, what was the rationalization during this time? Like you're noticing and observe, like hindsight's always 20/20, right? Like you're observing that some people are coming to you saying some things tell me a little bit more. It sounds like you were about to share that, by the way. I didn't mean to cut you off in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Nobody's actually asked me that like direct. It's a really great question. I think there is a difference in how founders see the company and how employees, even early employees, see the company. When you're a founder in the company, you actually don't care about any of that stuff, and you never will. You don't really care about like your salary. You don't care about your title. Like you're really that's kind of what it means to be a founder. And as a founder, like I think I project that thinking to like the early employees. It's like, oh, they're asking about it, but it's not that important because we're all in this together, right? And we are in this together. And the early engineers at Gusto, engineers today, we're also bought into the mission of the company. That's one of the real strengths of Gusto, I think. But I think there is a difference in the mindset of founders and then the mindset of even early employees. And as founders, I think it is easy to not take that as seriously because you yourself, like, it's not as important.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit of projection.
Bit of projection. I'm also hearing in that too, just a difference in motivation, right? And not, and this is something like I think a lot about. I mean, even internally with Know Your Team is, you know, the fact that like what we are all individually motivated by like is so strong. And so it's so easy to project that. And the thought that it might actually be different for other people and vary it's like hard to wrap your head around. And also like, and I think about this question a lot with Know Your Team is like, how do you figure out also then like, well, what are other people's motivations? Like, how do you have, you know, like to what extent does that matter? How do you actually unpack that? But it comes down to that is, you know, what you're motivated by and building this thing and seeing it in a certain way and what success for the company looks like is likely different naturally than people who are coming after you and are not founders, totally. Which is fine, but it's different.
Yeah, it's totally fine. It's very normal. It's very healthy.
Exactly. Yeah.
But everyone is in like we're all in this together. They care about the mission.
Of course.
And just because you care about these other things doesn't necessarily mean you care about the mission that we're on together any less.
Right. Right.
So I think that's like that was like I guess that's another big learning of mine.
Yeah.
That not everyone thinks like.
No, it's like newsflash, seemingly so obvious.
Exactly.
But when you're in it, you can't. Yeah, it's hard to get your head out of it for sure.
Yeah, and I remember this one specific moment where it did take my co-founder Josh, the CEO, a really tough conversation with me.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. To
tell me more.
To tell me that like, hey, you need to focus on the second bucket of work more, and in fact, you need to stop coding like immediately, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and
how did you take that at the time?
Not good. I'm generally pretty even keel, so like I think on the outside, like
I appreciate the honesty, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the outside, I was, obviously fine and like taking the feedback well, but inside, like your feedback, especially if it's critical feedback, it is like it's hard to listen to. It's good to listen to, but it is it's always hard.
Always hard.
And in my head, it's like you don't understand. There's all these bugs. All these customers are having issues. You don't see all the stuff that's going on in the code base, and can't just like tell me to stop coding and like I need to be in there and fixing things. Otherwise, this company is going to fall apart. That's what kind of went on in my head. And then like kind of some like weird things happen. Like you start to hide a little bit when you're coding, because you shouldn't be doing it, but you still need to do it.
Covert coding.
So, yeah. I don't know if that's just me, but a little bit of that happened. But ultimately, like sometimes you need to take a step back from it, let it sink in for a few days, and you start thinking about it, and you're like, you know what, there is some truth to this, and feedback, even if not delivered well, like always has like a good. There's my philosophy is that there's always something beneficial that you can extract, that you can learn from that. Absolutely. And a great part of just like growth mindset is like, even if you don't agree with every single thing, there's something in there that's of value to you, and your job is to just focus on that part and nothing else. Right. That's the only thing gonna like really accelerate your growth personally.
I love that. Yeah, it's just information, right? You can filter it in any way, but it's information. It's a data point, right?
Yeah. And you could reject feedback too. You don't have to like agree with all of it.
Nope.
But I always try to look for some truth in it. Right? It's coming from. So yeah, I think after a couple of days, I was like, yeah, you know what? There is actually a lot of truth to this. And when I think maybe a year or two ahead, like that is probably like where this goes anyways. And so I'm going to do an experiment for myself. I'm actually going to just stop like cold turkey. And
interesting.
Immerse myself in people empowerment and people development and leading technical teams. And so at that point, what I decided to do was a bit extreme. I actually just bought a plane ticket to New York for a week. This is during the weekday. This is like just for
Yeah.
Monday through Sunday.
And you're based in San Francisco at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm based in San Francisco, so I flew to New York. I was one of the, I always liked New York, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna just hang out there. I don't have any plans. I'm going by myself, and I'm gonna just hole myself up in a hotel room and read all of these books that I took with me. Like I literally took a suitcase full of like management books.
Okay, okay, we've got to pause here. Okay, what was in the suitcase? Like what books? And how did you figure out which books to get? Were you literally just like, okay, Amazon business category, like top sellers, like top 20, or with their, recommendations?
So I did have some like mentors that I've been talking to. People like Steve Herod, who's the CTO, ex-CTO of VMware, and Aditya, who was the head of engineering at the time for Dropbox. Yep. And I would ask them questions like, if I were to pick some books, like, what do you recommend I read? And so I kind of like, cobbled together through people I know or like, threads that I've read, like what books to get. And I took it to New York and basically my intent was to actually go and read them all and learn as much as I could.
Yeah.
I utterly like failed.
I was about to say, what happened? I'm like
so
bracing myself.
Was, it actually ended up being a time where I actually just coded like nonstop.
You're kidding me.
So I had this one feature that I was working on, and I got sucked in again. I basically holed up and like built relatively like big feature ask, and just came back having not really read much, and spending most of the time doing exactly what I was trying to avoid. And so I came back like somewhat proud that I had like finished this feature, but also like somewhat embarrassed that I had actually utterly failed in this somewhat like expensive like investment that I had made in myself.
Wow.
So that actually, I had like another false start there.
And just to pause on that moment, just for a second, like, was it sort of a moment of like at the time? Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you did have almost like a self-acknowledging, like guilt almost of, man, this is like, it's almost like I'm trying to think of what a good analogy is. It's like you're trying to like eat
it's like
better.
You're trying to go on a diet and then
I was literally
like binge eat
and you like go to Whole Foods and you like get the grocery cart with like all the expensive organic like fruits and vegetables, and then you go home and you eat like the Ben & Jerry's like Cherry Garcia in the freezer or something like that. Maybe that's
shrimp,
I don't know.
Shrimp chips, my snack choice.
Shrimp. Okay, there we go. Like mine is definitely ice cream. Like that would be my sin of choice. But that is like the visual of that too, and just like the narrative is. I mean, I'm smiling because it's just so relatable. Like we're so fallible as humans every time we do try to make a big behavior change.
Yeah.
So relatable.
Yeah. So came back complete failure, but one quote I really like is you either win or you either learn. So if you lose, if you fail, it's a learning opportunity. And that was just kind of a really painful lesson, I think. Just kind of like my true natural inclination, and that how hard it's going to be for me. And so after that, there wasn't any like glorious attempt again. I just kind of, took that learning and I was like, okay, I actually really need to focus on my own personal development as a leader for this engineering team. And slowly but surely, I wish there was a more exciting like climax of the story, but just started reading books and getting really into it and meeting as many people as I could, getting connected to people who would become my mentors later. We had raised some money, so also was fortunate enough to get connected with some executive coaches as well.
Awesome.
And I think just through all of that, really kind of embraced this new type of challenge that I was facing and how to become a better leader. And then, just knowing my inclination with coding, where I tend to get like sucked in.
Yeah.
I just had to like quit cold turkey, essentially. And the few
You
times
describe it almost like a drug, right? By the way, it's so it's so funny in a good way. Like
and
we
like
all have that, like the thing we're addicted to, right? Like the thing that like it's probably the reason we got into the industry, or as part of the work that we do. Just like that gives us kind of that
oh yeah,
thrill. Yeah,
that's why I studied engineering. Like it's just
yeah,
it's play for me. It's fun.
yep,
And time flies just like you're hanging out with friends, having a good time. Um, it's the same thing for me too.
yep.
It's just time flies. It's just what I naturally love doing. Um, and so really immerse myself. And then as you kind of learn more and you start to get better at it, you
Hmm.
start to like it more too as well, right? And you get more involved in it.
I'm curious about that. It's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about because in some ways, like you're sort of taking one for the team in that like you're giving up something that you actually intrinsically love to do and that you're
Hmm.
good at. And I mean, you think about sort of where you get
Yeah.
that sense of flow, right? Like you don't really
Oh,
get the sense of flow from management. I'm sorry. It's just,
yeah.
one-on-ones with people, like thinking about compensation structures, et cetera. So I'm wondering, like, yeah, how did you essentially, and I don't want to overstate it, right?
Yeah.
Learn to love leading people.
Yeah. I think the big breakthrough for me
Yeah.
is that I think it is a flow, but it's a different type of flow that happens over a much longer period of time. And you
Interesting.
can't like
Yeah.
look at it in shorter time frames. Because if you look at it in shorter time frames, like I'm in meetings all day and a lot of them are like hearing about issues and problems. And not all of them are fun. Like I don't think that's true. I don't think everyone as a manager loves every single meeting that they're in.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, no, no.
But those meetings turn into like working with your teams to find solutions. And those solutions are oftentimes not like engineering solutions where you fix a bug and you get a test pass and then all of a sudden it's not an issue anymore. They're much more complex issues and they take a variety of different angles to solve. But over a period of months, you look back on that problem that you were dealing with and you see the change that you've helped steer over
Yes.
months, right? And when you look back, that sense of satisfaction for me is incredible. It's I derive a lot of happiness from the change that I'm able to do over the longer period of time. And I've seen it happen enough now that whenever I am in a tricky situation or a difficult situation, I look forward now to see, okay, 6 months from now, when we've kind of put together a plan and slowly but surely start to solve the problem, I know I'm going to look back on this moment and see how much better we are 6 months from now than we are today. And because this has happened so many times, like looking back, I'm now I think able to look forward and get a lot of what I'm doing day to day. So that's kind of
Absolutely.
almost like a mindset shift on you have to like look at it over a much longer period of time. And I would say
Yes.
I get the same amount of satisfaction in doing this and same amount of addiction, I think, as
Huh. I think those are such encouraging words for so many of the founders and leaders who started, their career in an individual contributor role, got addicted to the thrill of that, and now have to find a way to love something maybe they might not have inherently learned to love.
Yeah.
Leadership
Yeah.
in this case. And I so appreciate, Edward, the advice about changing the timescale of impact and of progress. It's not we ship this feature in a month and then you see, revenue numbers go up or engagement numbers go up. It's a 6-month timescale.
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of problem. Maybe that isn't as objective of what is good or bad, right? Or it's a year-long timescale. So I think that's such helpful advice of like, we should adjust our relative frame of expectation around when we expect to see something different, see something change.
Absolutely.
And then I think the other thing that you touched on, and I may be projecting here, and so would be curious to sort of hear your thoughts back, is the impact is also different, right? So it's like with the kinds of problems that you're solving are problems that enable other people to then do their work versus the work itself, and there's a problem in the work itself and in the code itself or in the design itself. And it's a different kind of impact.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've seen people during their time at Gusto grow so much, and some of them leave to go start their own companies and go do amazing things. And of course, everyone is kind of responsible and accountable to their own success and failures. But part of me also knows that I played a small part in helping this person get there. And it's a totally different type of satisfaction you get. But I love it. I love seeing that kind of stuff. And
totally. And I think
and organizational growth as well.
Oh, absolutely. And what I infer too from that is, something we think a lot about at Know Your Team is the fact that organizational growth and success is tied directly to individual growth and success. Like, you actually can't have a team be successful if each individual doesn't feel like they're making progress against their own dreams and goals and aspirations. And so, we think a lot about, we need to talk about company mission. We need to talk about our, team goals and values. But we actually just finished off, we did a retreat, last week. And one of the things I asked each team member to do was to write out essentially like a personal vision statement. And don't take longer than an hour to write it. And you could literally, it could be a drawing, like it could be a paragraph, it could be a manifesto, whatever you want it to be. Like, I don't really care. But the idea is 10 years from now, what do you want to be true for yourself, right? Because that individual person's dreams, aspirations, idea of what is success, we have to find a way as leaders to connect that to the bigger picture, or else it just doesn't matter to them.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the best alignment that you can get is if people are doing the things that are in line with their personal goals. That's also really aligned with the company goals.
Exactly.
And then also stuff that they're really good at, right? And if you can, as a leader, map the work that needs to get done to the people that you have and find that alignment, everything just falls into place so
Doesn't
nicely.
it?
And, people do the best work of their lives.
Oh, I know.
Make a huge impact on the company, and they get a lot of personal growth from it. It's really awesome to see that. So I try to spend my time thinking about how do I and the alignment isn't always there because,
of course,
it's not, we don't live in a perfect world, but it's a puzzle, right? You need to kind of figure out how to optimize for that for everybody. And for
absolutely. No, and it's actually, something that I wanted to ask you is how do you create that alignment, right? How do you think about that, right? You were saying it's kind of like a puzzle. Do you block off specific time? Is it conversations and one-on-ones? Do you spend time during retreats? how, and so one, how do you do it? And then second question being, what happens when it doesn't line up?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with hiring. So you can find that alignment with the company by just being selective on who you invite into the company.
Yes,
right. And so we have
agree.
interviews that test for values alignment with Gusto values. And that just kind of just makes a higher probability that the people that you're working with, there's already that alignment, right?
Yes.
And then also skills, right? We're always looking for people who have the skills that the company needs to continue to be successul. So that's another part of the interview process, right? And so just by the interview process, you are already trying to create that alignment of the values alignment between the individual and the company, but then also skills alignment of what this individual has and what the company needs.
Yes.
And so you're already in a good starting point if you spend a lot of time upfront investing there in the interview process. And then once they're in the company, I think what I do tactically is I actually, for all of my reports, have one-on-ones that are tactical one-on-ones, which I have either every week or once every 2 weeks, depending on the individual. And those are just more problem solving, what's going on, how can I help you, type conversations. And then once a quarter, and everyone has a different cadence. Some do it once every 2 months or so, but I do it once every 3 months. I do a pretty deep career personal discussion.
Yes.
Where we don't talk about any of the tactical stuff. And I have a list of questions that I'll ask them and have them think about before the meeting. And we just have a conversation around, what they're looking for in that longer term time frame
Yep.
for them personally. What's your personal vision statement?
Right.
What are the things, opportunities in the company that you think could align with where you want to go personally?
Yep.
And the goal is not to have like a set of like action items. You're going to go to this team tomorrow.
Yes.
From that conversation, but to really understand, what is it that motivates that person and what they're looking for in the long term. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, is that it's just very different for every person. And so I think it's important to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
So I think just dedicating time, a separate time.
Exactly. The isolated time. I mean, I can't, for our own team, I'm even thinking about how, we recently hired an operations manager who expressed, she has a background in writing, a degree in creative writing, and then expressed a desire to sort of flex those skills more. And we started having her, write some things for our online leadership community, the water cooler. Her name's Mandy, and she's been like killing it. They're like extremely well written, and the engagement's really great. And it was just this beautiful surprise of, wow, like had I not asked that question during a one-on-one meeting about, what areas you want to grow in, like what skills do you want to further develop, like she wouldn't be contributing that. And that's like furthering the company. It's not just this like, personal thing where you want to improve your personal. It's like, that's important, but it's actually really helping the company. And it boggles my mind that, that just one small question sort of unfurled to this bigger project.
And
like you said, when you get that alignment, it's crazy just like what happens in that case. So then the second part of that question was, unfortunately, the flip, right?
Yeah.
Like what happens when
the alignment is not there.
Yeah, and you're like, okay, you tried to hire for it, and like, or here's the other thing, it changes sometimes for people, right? Like your motivations change.
Yeah, people change.
Yep.
Personal situations.
Exactly.
A really tactical one is people need to move sometimes for personal reasons, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And the team that they're on is not in that location, and so all of a sudden, like a very tactical reason has caused things to get misaligned. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think it is being okay with non-perfect alignment, but a good alignment. So I think it's very idealistic to think that during someone's time in a company, at every single point in time, that alignment is going to exist 100%. It's just not. And so I think it's, again, just optimizing for that alignment as much as you can. And being okay on both sides if it's not 100% there, right? Sometimes you'll have someone work on something that's better aligned with what they want to do, but maybe about 70% there for what the company needs. May not have been the number one thing on your list, but maybe it's like 2 or 3, and I can live with that. That's okay. And then also the opposite as well too, right? Sometimes you really need someone to be working on the number one thing for the company.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the individual is like, maybe it's not the perfect thing that they want to be working on personally, right?
Yeah.
And being okay with that too, right?
Yeah.
I think on both sides, we're on this mission together. And so there's like kind of a mutual understanding that like, there will be times where they'll be more aligned. Sometimes it won't be aligned, and sometimes it won't be aligned at all. And we just ask people sometimes saying, we just like, this is kind of the most important thing for the company.
Right.
When push comes to shove, like we have to prioritize the company over ourselves.
Right.
It won't be like this forever because I don't think this is sustainable, but we just need people to like help out with this thing. And I think that's okay. I think people are very open-minded about it. And one of the things, it goes back to like the values alignment, because that is one of the things we hire for is just that humility and also ownership mentality.
Yep.
That, we're all going to contribute, right? In ways that may not be the best way that I feel like I want to contribute. But we're all going to contribute.
Right.
So I think just setting expectations with people that it won't be aligned 100% of the time. And sometimes it's okay for a period of time where it's not aligned.
Absolutely. No, I think that I think it's a refreshing perspective. I mean, you're kind of the living example of that, Edward, right? Like you literally are doing your role today because you're like, well, it's kind of what the company needs, and
Yeah.
maybe in an ideal world, I would like be, in a hotel room coding, by myself
Yeah.
all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like it's but learning to love it over time, right?
Yeah.
And
exactly, and that's
like,
something that I think I found happens a lot.
Yeah.
You don't know. I think people are just really flexible in what they like to do, or things that they didn't think they liked to do. They find that they love doing it. I found that happened to me personally so many times. I didn't even want to be an engineer when I went to college. I had no idea what computer science, or I didn't have any of that at my school.
Our CTO is actually very similar. Like he actually hated coding, like when he first started.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's hilarious.
Well, I actually the first time I coded, I loved it.
You
I
like
just didn't
you
know
like that? Got it.
Yeah. I actually wanted to be a film director, believe it or not. When I wanted to grow up, and that's kind of like what my intention was when I was applying for schools and everything. And it just so happened that my roommate was taking a computer science class, CX 106A, and it was just almost out of peer pressure. He just wanted me to go to class with him and do homework together.
Have a
so, okay, I'll try it out. And I took it, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, I love this stuff so much. And so I've seen countless times how things that you may not think are aligned actually turn out to be aligned. People get challenged in ways that they didn't want to be challenged. And they're like, actually, like, I'm really liking this stuff. I want to keep doing it. Right. And so kind of alignment sometimes presents itself as well.
I agree. I mean, I can think about like my own personal journey and the things of like the initial inclination, like where that comes from is like often very random and externally influenced. And then like what you end up liking and to be surprising yourself along the way. Like we have such capacity for growth and flexibility just as humans.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that I'm reading between the lines here is the connection so much to the mission and the meaning of what you're doing, like this bigger picture. And that that's what everyone is centered around, and that gives people a reason to try to learn and challenge themselves. And I think I think without that, non-alignment doesn't work at all. Right?
You always need that like common thread of why people are here.
Right. Like even variance in alignment doesn't work. Like if you have a team that's, working together and people don't really care about the ultimate vision, and and then you ask people, hey, can you work on this thing even though it's not really personally what you want? That's not going to fly. You just get a bunch of mercenaries in the company. Exactly. Right.
Instead of missionaries, which is what you want.
Right. And I think Gusto is such a living proof of, like you said, you optimize highly for values, you hire around it. It sounds like you're extremely intentional around that. And so it's because of that you're able to even have the conversation of like, hey, we really need you right now, and it's temporary, and like it's, you might not like it in the beginning, that's okay, but like, can you hang in there for us for a little bit?
People rise to the occasion all the time. I mean, I think it's really cool because there's like kind of a recursive nature to this, because Gusto is a people company, right? We are building the people platform for small businesses. They have over 100,000 companies that are using us for not just payroll, but all the kind of benefits and employee life cycle aspects of things. And so that's something that we see, and we want to also impart in the companies that we serve as well. These are not just thoughts or conversations that like people in tech have. I think they're actually things that small business owners, whether it's a coffee shop or a church or professional services office, they all care about this stuff too. And they also have these like they also have these insights about their people as well.
Completely. And here's the thing. It's like, it's not just, I mean, you and I, we both work in tech. It's not just tech companies that have a meaningful mission and a meaningful vision. It's like every single company has a picture of a better place, a future for their customers that they want to create. It doesn't, it could be a construction company, it can be a law firm, whatever it is. And it's interesting because, I talk to so many founders and leaders who will tell me, like, Claire, we're an ad agency, so like vision isn't really
Yeah.
it's not really a thing. We don't think about, like, I don't know, like, yeah, we've like tried to spend some time thinking about vision, and I get really bullish on it and I push back and I say, hey, here's the thing. Like, this is the
Yeah.
one thing you have to commit to and talk to your team about
Totally.
co-creating it, because if you don't
Yeah.
have that, then the
Yeah.
moments when push come to
Yeah.
shove, when things aren't, it's going to be 70% aligned one way or another,
Yep.
that's not going to
Yeah.
work. People are going
Totally.
to
Totally.
leave,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the work's not going to be very good. And so
Yeah. Absolutely.
this is just such a wonderful reminder to me of very practically how much vision comes into play, and values, and
Yeah.
purpose in an organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for smaller companies, a lot of times I found when I talk to them, I talk to our customers,
Yeah.
it's around like the community that they're in and how they're contributing to
Yeah.
people around them, the neighborhood. And I think that's just as beautiful of a thing too for
My
them.
God, it's critical. It's so critical, and I'm loving just the encouragement and nudge here for all of us as leaders to be thinking more intentionally about it, and how important that is for alignment overall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Edward, thank you, my goodness, for all your insights, for sharing your story too so candidly, and
Thank
in
you
such
for having me on
detail.
here. It was great to share,
You bet.
yeah, I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much again. And hey, for everyone who's listening, be sure to, to definitely reach out to Edward and check out Gusto. And if you've been enjoying this interview too, to leave us a review on our Heartbeat podcast on Apple as well. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to you, Edward.
Awesome.